All right, ready to unlock some serious English fluency. We're diving deep into 15 tips that go way beyond the usual advice. I think a lot of us, hit a wall sometimes trying to get that fluency.
It's true. These tips, though, they tackle those roadblocks head on. They're practical, but also based on how our brains actually learn languages.
Okay, so tip number 1, right off the bat, thinking in English. They're saying translating everything in your head just slows you down.
Yeah, and it's not just about speed, it's like, how natural does your English actually sound? If you're always translating, your sentences can get kind of clunky.
So how do we actually do that? Think in English. Sounds a bit magical.
It's more about practice than magic. The source says, start small. Everyday thoughts. Like, instead of thinking, what am I going to eat in your native language, try to phrase it in English, even if it's just in your head.
So like, what sounds good for dinner tonight? Just kind of narrating your day in English.
Exactly. It might feel a little weird at first, but it's like you're building a mental muscle.
I can see that. It's almost like immersing yourself, even if you're just at home. Which, speaking of immersion, that's tip number 2.
Right. This one's about creating an English-speaking environment wherever you are. It's not about, flying to London, but, small tweaks to your routine.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Examples, please.
Well, all the tech you use, right? Your phone. Have you ever thought about switching the language settings to English? Or, the apps you use every day?
That's a good one. It's like having a little English tutor whispering in your ear all the time.
And think about your downtime, too. Instead of, mindlessly scrolling, what if you follow some English-speaking creators? You're getting entertained, but also picking up real-world language, slang,
Turning your phone into a language learning playground. I like it. Okay, so we're rewiring our brains, immersing ourselves. And of course, we can't forget about actually speaking it.
Right. Tip number 3 is all about that. Practicing speaking, even when you're alone.
I think this is where people get stuck. That fear of making mistakes, sounding silly.
Yeah, it's understandable, but the more you speak, the faster you improve, right? Mistakes, they happen, but they're valuable. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times.
So it's about shifting our mindset from avoid mistakes at all costs to mistakes are part of the process.
Yeah, embrace those stumbles. The source even says, talk to yourself as you do things. Narrate what you're doing. Okay, making coffee now. Maybe I should add a bit more sugar.
It's giving yourself a running commentary in English. I have to admit, it feels a little strange at first, but I see the logic.
And if you're feeling really brave, there's this thing called timed free flow. Kick any topic, like your favorite food. Set a timer for a minute and just talk. Don't stop, don't overthink it.
That's a cool challenge. It takes the pressure off perfection and just gets you comfortable with expressing yourself, even if it's a little messy.
Right, you build that confidence muscle too. Which leads us to tip number 4, which focuses on phrases, not just individual words.
This is interesting. Vocabulary is important, but the source says phrases are even more so.
Why? Think of it this way. Words are like bricks, but phrases are like pre-assembled walls. They show you how words fit together naturally. So instead of just memorizing happy and today, learn, I'm so happy today.
So it's about that flow and structure of English.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, once you learn some key phrases, you can start changing them for different situations.
It's like having Lego pieces you can rearrange.
Right. Okay, so we've got thinking in English, immersing ourselves, speaking practice, focusing on phrases. Tip number 5 takes reading and adds a twist. It's about reading out loud every day.
Reading's good for you, but what's so special about reading out loud?
When you read silently, you can skim, and your brain might not really process the sounds. But reading aloud forces you to say each sound, pay attention to pronunciation, even get the rhythm of the language.
I can see how that helps with fluency.
And the source even suggests recording yourself. I know, it can be kind of awkward.
Yeah, that takes courage.
But it's like having your own pronunciation coach. You hear how you actually sound. Do certain sounds trip you up? Is your intonation a bit flat? You can catch those things and work on them.
That's a great point. It's not just understanding the words, it's capturing that music of spoken English. Speaking of music, how does the next tip fit in?
So tip number 6, it's about getting out there and interacting with other English speakers. Intimidating, but super important for fluency.
This is where a lot of people hit a wall,
Yeah.
right? You can study grammar all day, but if you don't actually use it in conversations, it's like learning to swim without getting in the water.
Exactly. And the good news is we have so many options to connect with English speakers, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
I'm guessing this is where technology comes in again.
Absolutely. Online communities, they're amazing. Think Reddit, Discord servers, Facebook groups for English learners. You find people from all over the world. They share your passion for the language.
It's like a global network of language buddies right there. It takes the pressure off too, right? Everyone's there to learn and support each other.
And it's not just practicing English, it's connecting with different cultures and perspectives.
Okay, so we're building confidence, expanding our vocabulary, interacting with others. What's next?
Tip number 7 introduces shadowing. It sounds mysterious, but it's simple and really effective. Have you ever tried it?
I've heard of it, but to be honest, I'm not quite sure how it works. What do you actually do?
It's all about imitation. You choose an audio source like a podcast, a movie clip, anything. Listen to a sentence, pause, and try to repeat it exactly like the speaker. Pronunciation, tone, even their pauses.
So you're like their vocal shadow. But what's the benefit?
It trains your ear to hear the nuances, the rhythm, the intonation, how native speakers connect words, and it helps you break free from your native language's pronunciation patterns.
So fine-tuning your accent, getting a feel for the natural flow, makes sense.
And it's surprisingly fun. It's like a game, trying to perfectly mirror their voice.
Okay, so we're shadowing native speakers, interacting, embracing mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, I'm curious how this source addresses that fear of making errors, which I think haunts a lot of language learners.
Yeah, it can be a major roadblock. Tip number 8 tackles this head-on. Overcoming that fear. It's about seeing mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn.
I love that reframing. It reminds us we're all human.
Exactly. And the source suggests something really helpful and try to laugh at your mistakes. Not in a, mean way, but like, oh, that came out wrong, but I'll get it next time.
It's about not taking ourselves too seriously. Remembering it's a journey, not a race to perfection.
Exactly. Sometimes the most memorable learning moments come from those little blunders.
True. A little humor goes a long way. Okay, so we're embracing mistakes, having fun, but let's not forget about honing our writing skills.
Right. Tip number 9 reminds us that writing is just as important as speaking for mastering English. It solidifies knowledge and helps you understand grammar and vocabulary better.
I think people focus so much on speaking, they neglect writing. But it's like a secret weapon.
I agree. Writing lets you slow down, think about your word choices, structure your thoughts clearly.
And the source has some practical suggestions for fitting writing into your routine.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Keep a journal in English, write social media posts, even comments on blogs or forums.
It's about finding those little chances to flex those writing muscles and get comfy expressing yourself in written English.
And as you write more, you'll start to notice patterns in your errors. Helps you pinpoint where you need to improve your grammar or maybe learn more words.
It's like having a feedback system built in.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got thinking in English, immersion, speaking, phrases, reading aloud, interacting with others, shadowing, embracing mistakes, and writing. What's next?
Tip number 10 brings back that idea of thinking in English, but this time it's reflecting on your day in English at the end of the day.
So instead of narrating as you go, you take time to recap everything that happened, but in full sentences in English.
Exactly. It's like a mental debriefing. Today I woke up early, went for a run, had a meeting, cooked dinner, practicing putting those thoughts together.
Helps with building confidence in those longer sentences, I bet.
And it helps you see any gaps in your vocabulary. Maybe you struggle to describe certain things. This exercise highlights those gaps, so you can focus on learning those words.
Okay, we're thinking in English, we're writing, talking to ourselves. I'm starting to feel like I should just change my name to English speaker. But seriously, I'm loving these tips. What else?
This next one's a favorite. It's all about using music and movies.
Now we're talking. But how do we turn that into a language learning experience?
It's about making learning fun, right? Music and movies are full of real-world language, slang, everything, plus different accents and speaking styles.
So it's like absorbing English without realizing you're studying. I like it.
Yeah.
But where do we start? Just turn on Netflix and hope for the best.
You can start with stuff you enjoy, but be strategic. If you're a beginner, use English subtitles. As you get better, try turning them off for a bit to challenge yourself.
Training those ears to tune in.
And for music, try singing along. Even if you don't understand every word at first, it's great for pronunciation, getting the intonation right.
Makes those tricky vowel sounds a bit easier. It's like a karaoke booth for language learning.
And speaking of pronunciation, that's tip number 12, getting clear and accurate pronunciation. Can be tricky, but it's key to being understood and feeling confident.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, and it can be frustrating when you know what you want to say, but the sounds just won't come out right.
It's a common challenge, but there's so much out there to help you. The source recommends YouTube channels about pronunciation, apps like LSA Speak, and even trying the mirror method.
The mirror method.
It's simple, but it works. Stand in front of a mirror and wash your mouth as you speak English. See the shape of your lips, your tongue, how you make those sounds?
I've never thought of that. It's like giving yourself visual feedback.
Exactly. And those pronunciation apps, they can give you instant feedback too.
Okay, so singing along, practicing in the mirror, using technology, this is great. But sometimes the biggest challenge is just getting our brains to automatically switch to English mode.
Yeah, and that's where tip number 13 comes in. Asking yourself questions in English. It might sound simple, but it trains your brain to think in English more naturally.
So what kind of questions are we talking about here?
Start with simple ones about your day. What did I do this morning? What am I looking forward to? What's my opinion on this? It's not so much about the content, but about forming those thoughts in English.
Like a conversation with yourself, but in English.
Right. It gets those mental gears turning, and it helps you get good at asking and answering questions, which is key for any conversation.
Okay, talking to ourselves, asking ourselves questions. We're really going all in on this English immersion. But I think sometimes the biggest hurdle is staying motivated, not getting overwhelmed by how much there is to learn.
So true. That's why tip number 14 is crucial. Setting realistic goals. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to be fluent overnight, but language learning takes time.
It's about setting ourselves up for success, not disappointment. So instead of saying, I want to speak English perfectly in 3 months, we need smaller milestones.
Exactly. Set specific, achievable goals. This week, I'm going to learn 10 new words about my hobbies. Today, I'm going to practice speaking for 5 minutes. Small wins keep you going.
Love that. Takes the pressure off and lets you celebrate those small victories, which keeps you motivated. Speaking of motivation, that brings us to our final tip for this part of our deep dive.
Tip number 15, this one's important. Be consistent and have fun. Might sound obvious, but it's the foundation. Consistency is key. Even if you only have 15 minutes a day, make it a habit and find ways to make it enjoyable.
I think that's where people give up. If it's not fun, it's easy to get discouraged.
Absolutely. Play word games, watch funny movies, connect with other learners, reward yourself. Make language learning a positive part of your life.
It's about that balance, challenge, and enjoyment. Okay, we've covered so much thinking in English. Immersion, speaking, phrases, reading aloud, interacting, shadowing, embracing mistakes, writing. It's been an amazing journey so far.
It has, hasn't it? And we're just getting started. We've got a solid foundation with these first 15 tips. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore even more strategies to take your fluency to the next level.
I'm excited to continue this with you. And for our listeners, take a moment to think about what's resonated with you so far. What are you curious about? What's one small thing you can do today to make learning English a more regular, enjoyable part of your life?
Remember, every step you take, even if it's tiny, it's a step towards your fluency goals. Embrace the challenge, enjoy the journey, and unlock the power of language.
We'll be back soon with more insights to help you supercharge your English learning. Until then, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep that passion for language alive. Welcome back to our deep dive exploring these awesome English learning tips. We've already uncovered so many practical strategies, and I'm curious to see what other gems we'll discover in this next batch.
You know, thinking back on those first 15 tips, what really stands out is the focus on active engagement.
Active engagement, yeah.
It's not enough to just passively absorb information. You've got to use the language, experiment, make mistakes, and push yourself beyond your comfort zone.
It makes sense. It's like, learning to play an instrument. You can read every music theory book, but until you pick up that instrument and start playing, you're not going to develop those skills.
Exactly. It's all about putting that knowledge into action.
So what's up next on our list?
Well, the source talks about this technique called active listening. It's more than just hearing the words, it's like really engaging with the material.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does that actually look like?
So instead of just letting the words wash over you, you're actively participating. Taking notes, maybe summarizing the main points, asking yourself questions as you go.
So it's like having a conversation with the material, not just passively absorbing it.
Exactly. You're challenging yourself to truly understand the information.
Okay, I like that. It's about being present, not just zoning out.
Speaking of being present, the source also talks about mindfulness in language learning, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and sensations as you're learning.
Mindfulness for language learning. How does that work?
Well, it's about noticing when you're getting frustrated or overwhelmed and taking a step back to refocus.
So recognizing those mental roadblocks.
Yeah, and also being aware of your own learning style. What works best for you. Maybe you're a visual learner, maybe you prefer listening. The point is to figure out what helps you learn most effectively.
It's like being your own language learning scientist.
Exactly. And just as important as the methods is setting realistic expectations. It's easy to get discouraged if you don't see results right away. But remember, language learning is a journey.
Right. It's a process that takes time, effort, consistency.
And patience. You're basically rewiring your brain. That doesn't happen overnight.
It's like building a house. You don't expect to have it finished in a day.
And speaking of foundations, the source stresses mastering the basics. Grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, those are the building blocks.
Yeah, it's like learning the alphabet before you can write a novel.
Exactly. Once you have those fundamentals, then you can add more complex stuff. Idioms, phrasal verbs, those nuances that make the language come alive.
And as you progress, don't forget to celebrate those achievements, no matter how small.
So important. It's easy to focus on what we haven't achieved yet and forget how far we've come.
Celebrating those small wins keeps you motivated.
Absolutely. Okay, back to those active learning strategies. The source suggests making language learning part of your daily routine.
So not just something you do in a classroom.
Right. Think about all the things you do every day. Commuting, cooking, waiting in line, all those are chances to practice English.
Okay, but give me some examples. How do I actually integrate English into my routine?
Well, let's say you have a long commute. Instead of music, listen to a podcast in English.
Right.
Or, if you like the news, read a few articles in English each day.
It's about being intentional with those little moments.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful ways to make it stick is to use it in real-life conversations.
I agree. But sometimes it's hard to find those opportunities, especially if you don't live in an English-speaking place.
True, but there are ways around that. Have you ever thought about a language exchange group or meetups for English learners?
I've heard of them, but haven't tried one. What are they like?
Basically, it's people who are all learning English and they want to practice. It's a supportive environment. You can try new words, make mistakes, get feedback.
That sounds less intimidating than talking to a native speaker.
Right, and you might even make some new friends.
Okay, I'll definitely check that out. What else does the source suggest?
It stresses trying different methods and seeing what works best for you. There's no one right way to learn.
Right, we all learn differently.
Exactly. Some people love textbooks, others prefer apps or online courses. The key is to find what keeps you engaged.
It's like finding the right recipe for your language learning journey.
Speaking of recipes, have you ever considered learning English through cooking?
Oh, I love that idea.
It's a fun way to learn new words and about the culture.
That's way more fun than staring at a textbook.
And, to speed up your learning, find a language partner, someone to practice with regularly.
Having a language partner is great, but how do you find a good one?
Lots of ways. Online platforms, social media groups, even asking around locally.
You need to find someone at a similar level with similar goals.
And don't be afraid to try out a few different partners before you find the perfect match.
Like dating, but for language learners.
Exactly. Speaking of expanding your horizons, the source also talks about immersing yourself in the culture.
That always seemed daunting, especially if you can't just move to an English-speaking country.
It doesn't have to be that big of a change. You can watch movies and TV shows, listen to music, read books, even try cooking traditional dishes.
It's about getting a taste of the culture.
Exactly. And it can help you understand the language better.
It adds another dimension to your learning.
And it can be a lot of fun.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but I'm sure there's even more we can explore.
Definitely. There are so many ways to approach language learning. The beauty is you can tailor it to fit your needs and what you like.
It's about being creative.
And never giving up, no matter how hard it gets.
Well said. I'm feeling inspired to try some of these strategies.
Me too. I know you can achieve amazing things with the right attitude and effort.
Okay, what's next on our list of language learning gems? We're back. Part 3 of our deep dive. And wow, we've covered some serious ground already. All these tips for boosting English fluency, it's pretty inspiring.
It is, yeah. And, going through all these different strategies, I keep noticing this one theme.
Oh, what's that?
It's like language learning, it's not just about passively soaking up information. It's got to be active, experimenting, messing up, finding what clicks for you.
That's so true. It's like we've got this toolbox full of tools, and it's up to us to pick the right ones for the job.
Exactly. And one of the most important tools is consistency. This source, it really hammers home that point. It's not about cramming, but making it a habit, even if it's just a few minutes each day.
That's a relief, actually. I think a lot of people feel like they need hours and hours to make any progress.
It's like those small, consistent efforts, they build up over time.
Kind of like compound interest. Small investments, big results in the long run.
Exactly. And it makes it feel less overwhelming, right? And
Yeah.
instead of these huge study sessions, just find those little pockets of time throughout your day.
Okay, love that. Give me some ideas. How do we actually fit English into our busy lives?
Well, like you said, commuting. Perfect for listening to a podcast or an audiobook in English. Or cooking dinner. Put on an English cooking show.
I do that sometimes, listen to music in English while I'm working out or cleaning.
There you go. It's all about creating that immersion, but in a way that works for you. Speaking of, how do we stay motivated? Avoid burnout. Any tips from the source?
Motivation, it can be tough. Some days you're all in, other days, not so much.
This source, it reminds us that learning should be fun, not a chore. If you're not enjoying it, you won't stick with it. So find what makes it engaging, like connecting with other learners, maybe exploring English humor, or even rewarding yourself for reaching milestones.
I love that. Makes it feel less like work, more like a game.
Exactly. And remember, progress isn't always a straight line. You'll have good days, you'll have days where you feel stuck. Don't let those setbacks get you down. Enjoy the ride, celebrate the small wins, and just keep moving forward, even if it's a tiny step.
You know, that's so true. We focus so much on the end goal, fluency, that we forget to enjoy the process. But it's those experiences along the way that really make it worthwhile.
Well said. So, thinking back on everything we've discussed, what's resonated with you the most? Any tips you're excited to try?
For me, it's the consistency piece and finding those little ways to make English part of my daily life. Oh, and that focus on active learning. Trying things out, pushing my boundaries, and not being afraid of making mistakes.
Love those takeaways. And for our listeners, I hope you're walking away from this feeling inspired. You've got the tools, the strategies, and most importantly, the passion to achieve your goals.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been amazing exploring these 15 powerful tips with you. We've covered so much ground, from rewiring our brains to finding the joy in learning. And now, it's your turn.
Take what you've learned, experiment, and most importantly, never stop exploring the incredible world of language.
This is just the start of your English adventure. Keep practicing, keep learning, keep growing, and hey, who knows, maybe one day you'll be sharing your own tips with the world. Until then, happy learning.